Hi everyone, and welcome to your Studio Boo and You, I should do both sides, the dating show where we leave no stone unturned in our quest for the perfect work-life balance. Unlike most dating shows, there's no resolution, the contestants are mostly garbage, and no one goes on a date afterwards, but considering some dates I've had, I'm going to call that a win. So a little bit about me. So I am your host, Meredith. I'm a producer at Ultimus. If you're not really sure what a producer does, sometimes it looks like this. And sometimes it looks like this. Sometimes it's this, but mostly it's me talking to my delightful team like this. It's like 90% of the time, pretty much. So, as Kara said, Ultimus is a game studio based in Melbourne, Australia. And we're in the process of making our first title, Paperville Panic. You are a rookie firefighter in a town made entirely of paper, so it goes about as well as some of those dates I've had. As a brand new studio, we're in this really unique position where we both have absolutely no idea what we're doing half the time, and the freedom to shift and change and reflect as often as possible, because there's no set structure that's been set up as to how we're supposed to function, which to a degree is where I come in helping to build and frame and set that structure and what we're all about. So, that's me graduating very professionally. I studied narrative, theatre and communications at uni, so a kind of weird mix. I worked at Apple for a couple of years, but if you ask me any questions about iCloud, I will pretend to black out in front of you because I can't do it anymore. So I started with Ultimates just a couple of months after they formed, which was about March of last year. I joined in June as the marketer and PR and slowly started dipping my toes into community management and production stuff, and eventually my role just shifted to that space because that's where I was needed more. I've always been perpetually fascinated with the way we treat each other and ourselves, and I think we really have a lot of work to do in this industry to make every studio work harder to be a happier, better, more productive place. Working as part of any sort of startup, there are so many different questions that you have to ask yourself, from what's our biz dev approach? What's our marketing approach? What's the long-term plan? What's the plan for this game? And often the feeling and culture of your space is the last question you ask. And before you know it, it grows by itself. So today, we're gonna learn, that's one of our boos there. We're gonna learn what studio culture is, how it grows, and how you can impact it. We're gonna look at it from both the employee and more management level, but on a relatively introductory level, because I could go on for about 4 days, and that won't be any good for any of you. But wait, I hear you say, what is this nefarious, nebulous, strange thing called studio culture? So just like you would have learned from a family member, a friend, the deep, dark corners of the internet, at some point, someone has explained relationships to you, in one way or another. To improve your relationship with your studio boo, first of all, you have to understand what you're striving for and what it's all about. So studio culture is all about the management and cultivation of the relationship you have with your work, your fellow co-workers, and your management. I really hope that's not what I'm like to my team. I pray. And finally, yourself. And I'm sure we've all been there. So from this moment on, I want you to treat your workplace like your boo. Every studio that you move between, whether you're with one for 20 years or you're with one for 3 weeks, is like a partner. And so you need to treat it like that. You're going to go on a voyage together. See what I did there? That it can be hard to do that alone. So during your time with any team, you're actually going to go through a lot, not only personally but professionally. You're going to learn things together, you're going to be happy, sad, have a number of potentially huge life experiences along the way. So it's really, really important that you're all on the same page. Think about it this way. Relationships can happen kind of naturally, but who hasn't fallen into a quasi-relationship that's been really unclearly defined at some point and it ended up causing you a whole lot of problems? How'd that work out? If it worked out really well, please don't say anything because you'll ruin my statistics and I can't. You can just pipe down. So who creates it? Everyone who works within your office, whether it's locally, remotely, has a role to play in impacting that culture. Often, if you're someone who's directly involved with managing the day-to-day routine and how you structure your workflow and communicate, are best poised to shape and shift and influence that culture. When I was practicing, I had to make sure I didn't say shape shift really quickly, because if that's happening, you need to make some phone calls. Ultimately, it's the responsibility of management and producers to ensure that everyone is set up to do the best job they can in the environment that they can, because oftentimes they do have the most control in that scenario. But why does it matter? Who cares? You go to work, you come home, whatever, it's just work. Studio culture is like mold. So the day you open your doors, it doesn't exist yet. You just stroll into work, you're like, I'm so happy to be here, I'm working in games, this is the best. And then suddenly, it's grown out of some strange little corners of your working life. Sometimes it's the good kind of mold. Penicillin is mold, the more you know. But sometimes it's toxic mold. And if you leave it unattended, it starts to grow and grow and grow until you realise that you kind of need help finding the studio among the thorns or mold. So to get us thinking about what we want in our studio, let's meet some boos. So this is Boo 1. Boo 1 isn't always on the same page as you, but they do their best to understand. They don't really love you spending all your time with other people because they really want your attention. They're a little bit needy. They think that you need to sink all your time into the relationship for it to be successful. So let's meet Boo number 1. To an outsider, when they hear that, they might go, that's not a great relationship. But it's not always that black and white. To the individual, depending on your history and your work history, might be totally normal. Maybe they're only like that once a week, or maybe they really only demand your time when things are busy for them and they need a little bit of extra support. Does that sound familiar? Likes dogs. So Boo number 2. Boo number 2 is pretty kind to you and nice enough to your loved ones. You do fundamentally disagree on a few bits and pieces, like Boo 2 can be a little bit thoughtless sometimes and maybe drop some sexist remark every now and then. Boo 2. Is that big enough of a deal to you to end the relationship? What if it's intermittent? What if everything else is perfect, except for that? Loves walks on the beach, hates sand, of course, gets everywhere. So behind door number 3 is Boo 3. So Boo 3 is loving and super supportive. They want you to spend time with your family and friends. They have their own goals and they need support, but they encourage you to pursue your passions, as well as helping with theirs. Boo 3 still has their quirks and does some things that annoy you, but nothing particularly groundbreaking. They're a big fan of LARPing. Boo number 3. So just from those descriptions, who would you want to date? No, it's not number 1. Because dogs don't cure everything, just most things most of the time, okay? Of course you want a boo that allows you to have a comfortable work-life balance. You want someone who's going to support your mental and physical health, that encourages you to become the best version of yourself that you can be. No boo or studio is ever perfect, and they're never without their quirks. So what impacts these categories and how can we shape them? So let's talk about the work. So your work should make you feel like emoji spamming heart eyes to your friends. The more engaged you are with your work, the better you're going to feel, and the more likely you'll want to put in time within your space. When you go to an interview, remember to listen really carefully to what is expected of you. Does it sound like you're going to be challenged in a positive way? Does the work sound fresh and exciting? Does it make you feel like that? How many people have been in this role before you? 400? Is it a stormtrooper base? That's the only reasonable explanation. Make sure you're asking the right questions. I feel like this every day. Challenge both the work and the culture fit. If the expectations are that you'll do a certain kind of work and nothing else for the next 6 years, or there's no sense of progression, the relationship's not going to go anywhere, you're probably going to find yourself burnt out and tired of that boo pretty quickly. And especially if you find you're asking those questions and they're surprised to hear them, that can be a bit of a red flag. So your studio's culture informs the work. It's a two-way street. Multiple studies have been done on the relationship between work environment and productivity. In organisations with low employee engagement scores, there's 18% lower productivity, 16% lower profitability, 37% lower job growth, and 65% lower share price over time. That is 100% the worst. Beyond the business statistics that these experiences impact, there is a huge mental and emotional toll to working in a negative culture. There's a psychologist named Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, who talks about a state of flow that people enter, throwing back to an earlier talk too, when they're doing work they love. So flow is this state of optimal experience, and we all have a number of different names for it. You're focused, you're in the zone. You get loads of work done and you're having fun doing it. It's all about balance. You need to be able to work at something that is challenging, but not impossible. It's not going to frustrate you. It needs to be exciting, but not overwhelming. And it has to have some sort of obvious and visible impact. So a lot of the things that you can do to help support your work for your team: set clear goals. This goes for individual team members as well as overall. You can make these really obvious. You can use an agile framework. You can do whatever you want and scrum them, or you can just have conversations with people. By keeping them in the forefront of people's minds, it lets them feel like they have immediate feedback as they get a little bit closer to those goals. You want to maintain a balance between challenge and skill. Not only does this help you work out where you need to upskill your team, but it reduces the likelihood of them being frustrated because you're handing them work that they'd never be able to complete with no avenue for assistance. You want to reduce distractions wherever possible. I always encourage people to work in the way they feel most comfortable. If you know as an employee that you get way more work done listening to music, tell your team that. Let them know so that you can work out a way to work together. You also want to reduce or remove the pressure of failure. By letting team members have the freedom to make mistakes and to experiment and to test, you let them work in a free and more open state of mind, and you remove that self-consciousness and that fear. So remember when we talked about that two-way street? When you do work you love, a positive feedback loop's created. That energy that you have lets you complete more work more efficiently, creating a greater feeling of success and achievement along the way. This means better things for your studio as a whole too. By ensuring you're providing an environment for employees to enter that state and remove those negative feelings, you contribute to a greater output and experience. So part of your responsibility, if you are in a management or production role, is creating this state of flow by getting it down on paper. Write it down. The importance of a clear studio handbook cannot be underestimated. So Navi from Dino Polo Club, as you all know, she's been running around doing a great job, created an awesome studio handbook template as a guide if you're not sure where to start. It gives you the framework and the basis that you can jump off from for whatever your team might need. Especially if you're a producer and you're in that awkward netherworld between the executive team saying things and your dev team saying things, you need to be pushing the questions to people who can make the final decision. Uncertainty around things like sick leave, annual leave, carers leave, working hours can make people really stressed and really affect their daily role. The more you set process, just like you discuss needs in a relationship, the more you allow it to frame culture and clearly define roles and responsibilities and expected behaviours. If there's this lack of clarity in how people are disciplined or how they're treated, you're going to see this toxicity and resentment start to grow, and it's a lot more work to pull it back. This doesn't mean you have to have everyone's day down to the minutes. Routine can be really helpful for teams to work out how they need to progress on certain parts of the project, but it's an ever-changing industry, so you need to be ready to adapt. Just like any relationship, if you start scheduling your time down to the minutes, your partner's pretty quickly going to want to kill you. So there needs to be some flexibility, but that framework does help a lot. As part of any role, you need to steal, beg, and borrow from every other discipline you can. You are Aladdin, and other people's content is the apples. Get in there. If you're in any sort of role where you're structuring this, you need to read and watch everything, not that just relates specifically to games and game development. There's so much to learn from human resources, psychology, team building, dev cycle processes. You can pull things from all of them and just bastardize them into your own version that works for your team. Seek out content that tells you you're doing it wrong. It's up to you to make sure you're keeping up to date with how best you can influence the team. So you need to be proactive in trying new things and shaping process to fit your team along the way if something isn't working. So just like any partner you have, you're not always going to like their friends. Ideally, a boo that's interested in the same things as you, however, and has strong opinions on what is and isn't acceptable, will bring people around them that uphold and maintain similar values. However, there is always a chance that you'll have to work with people you don't necessarily get along with. Let's say your boo has bad breath. Awful. Some days it's fine, and others it makes you want to actively hide. A bad coworker is like bad breath. It doesn't define your boo, but it hangs around, it makes days worse, and it's kind of hard to escape. This is where you either need to find a way to get your boo's teeth brushed, get them chewing some gum, or confront them about their own hygiene. Spoiler alert, hygiene's culture. Now, there is a big difference between feeling physically unwell, threatened, or assaulted compared to just not feeling it. And it's important that it's of the previous, this is escalated as quickly as possible, if possible. If you're in a position where you feel this way and you don't feel like you have the support of your workplace or HR, you need to look at reaching out to family, friends, external workplace support, HR resources, police, whatever's necessary. Like in real life, it's not always easy to just leave. You are relying on an income, and some places will abuse this. Maybe your workplace or the employees are making you feel like you don't have the skills to be successful or forcing extreme hours on you. Make sure you educate yourself on the resources you have and try and take small steps to move towards improving your situation as best you can while keeping yourself as safe as possible. However, if you are working with a toxic coworker or in a generally negative environment and you've escalated it and nothing is happening, I'm going to say something really important. It is not up to you to fix it. You deserve to feel secure and enjoy what you do, and if one or more people are ruining that experience, it needs to be resolved. If you're not being taken seriously on something that important, it might be time to start looking elsewhere, because you deserve to be heard. This isn't a failing on your behalf, it's a failure on behalf of the company to provide you that safe and positive work environment. You have little impact on who your co-workers are unless you're directly involved in the hiring process. And I will say, if you are involved in that process, remember there is a huge amount of value in actively planning for and hiring diversely. Not only does having many different team members lend great perspectives to your creative work, but it also allows for an incredible amount of input into your studio culture in ways you would have never imagined. However, if you're not involved, you can still help keep that space positive in a few different ways. Ideally, any studio isn't going to have cliques, but if you have a less supportive boo, forging strong relationships with the people in the office who are positive and supportive of you and your work is important. This doesn't mean that they don't give you critical feedback and they don't try and guide your process and help you, but they're not interested in putting you down. At worst, the best thing you're going to get out of it is great references. Maybe you'll help to fix that culture together, or you'll get to a point where you're so secure that you can either get out of that negative culture, or maybe your relationship will blossom into a new studio and a brand new boo where you can shape those things that are important to you. You can also be as positive and as fantastic as you can be. You can't control anyone else's behaviour, but if you're forging forward to be a great influence on the feeling of the studio, you'll often find that not only will it rub off on others, but it means that you do have that satisfaction of doing your best with what you have while you're stuck there, essentially. But know when to get help. There's only so much you can do in terms of managing your relationships with your coworkers. Finally, the one relationship you will always be dealing with and the one boo you will never escape is yourself. Everyone's different and is going to have specific individual needs in relation to their studio, so you need to try to understand how best you work, how best you take and give feedback, and gain a strong understanding of your strengths and weaknesses. This can happen naturally over time if you force yourself to be introspective and reflective, but it can be difficult to get started. Statistically, 1 out of 5 people are coping with some form of mental health issue. If you look at your average studio, that's going to be a decent portion of your team. It's not enough to say, oh, well, we'll help those people if they present with it or if they come to us, because the reality is a lot of people who've struggled with these things for years probably won't bring them to your attention, or they'll be minimising their own struggles because people are very quick to brush off their own internal feelings or dialogue. So it's me, a case study. So I have a condition called fibromyalgia, which causes a whole host, shout out to my girl Steph, who has it too. It causes a whole host of random medical problems like fatigue, nausea, anything you can imagine, and also has a massive impact on mental health. So I've had to have numerous in-depth conversations where I educate my own team on what that's like for me, what I need to be supported, and how I can contribute if I'm not physically or mentally well enough to contribute the way I normally would. For me, it's really important to start to normalise these discussions so that they can feel comfortable to come and have the same discussions with me. But I also need to make sure I'm doing everything I can, whether that's eating well, sleeping well, minimising stress, taking medication, whatever, and recognising when I'm approaching a flare. It's not enough for me to just say, well, I have a chronic illness, sorry, can't work ever again, and move on. Just as the studio has a responsibility to be supportive as a duty of care, I have a responsibility to do everything in my control to stay healthy. I'm really lucky with my studio. They are very supportive, because an unsupportive boo in these scenarios would cause absolute havoc for my health. On that note, it's really important that you respect your colleagues' time away as well as your own time, no matter your role. People need time away to recharge, relax, and re-energize. Texting them, calling them, emailing them, asking them to send you a file or answer a question is the studio equivalent of the 1 a.m. you up text. Sure, there are exceptions in emergencies, but realistically, almost everything can wait a day. Now, all of this isn't to say that it's wholly a studio's responsibility to manage an individual's mental or physical health. At the end of the day, the only person who can take agency of that is themselves. But you do have the opportunity to have a really clear structure around your support systems, resources, and time away for your team for whatever reason they might need it. There is a detailed section in our studio handbook that discusses mental health, burnout, the impact those things can have, and the value that resources similar to Checkpoint and the rest listed there can have in supporting this. We actively tell our team that we're there to give them the time to manage and understand their own well-being and to support them wherever we have the capacity to. The main thing you need to remember, if you don't take anything else away, is communication. Communication is the golden ticket to your Willy Wonka factory of support. And it goes both ways. Making a plan with the rest of your team is the equivalent of swimming under the chocolate fountain. It's inherently rewarding and delicious, and I'm distracted. Let's move on. So now that you know a little bit about studio culture, I'm gonna tell you about my boo. So when I started, like I said, I was in a marketing role initially. Ultimes's aim had been to break into the virtual reality market and create something really phenomenal with a quick turnaround. Who hasn't planned that before? Once I got on board, we had a lot of really tough conversations about what the future looked like and realigning those goals. And we had a lot of conversations about that, but very few about the culture of the studio itself. We did, however, have extremely serious conversations about the best flavour of shapes. It's cheddar, don't at me. You're wrong if you think otherwise. And also a week-long bet on how many shapes were in a single box, and it's like 47, which for me just isn't enough. It wasn't until I started doing some research around studio culture, watching talks, and started to notice some small issues cropping up within the team that we started to bring it to the forefront of discussion. For previous workplaces, I had never really been in a position to influence the culture beyond being positive and friendly and working as a team, but I realised that here I had an opportunity to ensure we had one of the best places to work in Melbourne. Because we were working with a very young, small team, their relationships were created off the back of their university experiences. This was their first job, they were still unsure of their own skills and feeling like imposters, a huge issue in our industry, and feeling strongly about proving themselves in their roles was leading to clashes between disciplines. Over time, this distinct feeling of not being heard came up. Whether it was in discussions as a team, pitching ideas, a number of different people stated the same issue to us. Rather than implementing a talking stick, we decided we needed to create space where people couldn't be talked over or shut down, and ideas would be given the time they deserved. So we refined our stand-up, made sure we had individual time given to everyone to talk about where they're at and anything that they needed to bring up. It felt a little bit like putting a coin on a train line, ripping apart all of our process in the middle of development. But not only did that small change improve focus across the team, but it reduced those feelings of anxiety about trying to be heard in those bigger discussions. One thing we also looked at was our one-on-one meetings with team members, dates, if you will. In a relationship, if you want to keep the magic going, you need to make time for each other to check in closely. Once a month might seem too often, but having yearly reviews is a concept that is crazy to me. So much can happen in someone's life in a year, and if you blink and miss something really tough, it can be even harder for them to come to you next time. If you've managed to set up a culture of honesty and positivity, you'll usually find people will come to you directly anyway, but they're often not the people I'm most concerned about. What concerns me are usually the people who are getting things done quietly and quickly, not always getting the time and energy they deserve put into their training and support. By introducing our one-on-one meetings monthly, not only were we able to check in on the physical, emotional, and mental well-being of each team member in a private, confidential environment, but we're able to track what they're wanting to work on and what training interests them. This has let us help them drive their own development and get excited about things within the scope of what can be exhausting when you're working on the same projects for multiple years. So picture this. You're on a first date, and you've spent hours explaining that you really want to be a great animator, like that's your passion. And your date's like smiling and nodding, seems really engaged, and you're like, yeah, this is great. And you end up in a relationship together, and 6 months later, they get you a rigging course, woo! Sure, it's a nice thought, almost the right thing, but you're probably going to feel really hurt and frustrated and not heard. You might even feel like what you want isn't important. As a producer or manager, let your team tell you what excites them and set their own goals, and make sure you guide rather than demand. Something that was hugely important to us was our treatment of an introduction of contractors, freelancers, and part-timers. There's been a culture in our industry for too long of exploiting these individuals. We've had multiple contractors who come in and have said, I'm just going to work on this when I get home, just for a few hours. Don't worry, totally unpaid, because they're aware of both just how precarious the industry is for those in a full-time position, let alone those on freelance or contract. We make it clear that those hours are to be logged and tracked and paid accordingly. It's sad that I even have to stand up here and state that, or that it's even a bonus on the studio culture side, because it should be the norm. But there is this culture that within industry, as exciting as games, there's always someone who's willing to do it for free. And even worse, there are always studios, big and small, who will take advantage of that. I don't say this offhand. There have been many conversations and stories I've been told of this exact scenario. This isn't okay, and this isn't a studio you should engage with. We should all be doing more to name and shame those that do take advantage of that labour until this culture ends, and support those that speak out. The more it's kept a known secret, the more new individuals entering the industry are going to feel forced and compelled to give their value and time away for little to no compensation. On the same note, it's really important that recognition is noted. As any freelancer knows, your resume is composed of your work. So not having your name credited on a game you worked on, or not being credited until months after the fact, can be a death knell when you're looking for more work. I highly encourage all studios to keep a tracked list of any and everyone who has contributed to your creative process, as well as adding any relevant individuals to your press kit and providing those who are with you for an extended period of time business cards. It's a small investment on your part that does wonders for these occasionally transitionary employees. And if you can give them a full-time job, do it. On that note as well, you should be paid accordingly for your role. This should be an open, honest conversation you can have with your manager at any time. They'll want to build you up. Scope creep is a real problem in both game development and in individual roles. In indie studios, you're so often expected to be filling the gaps across whatever role you do, but if you find you're working on more than your original job description, it stands to reason that you should be paid accordingly. If your studio doesn't bring it directly to your attention, you need to be able to bring it to theirs without fear of anger. Like any couple, you need to be able to communicate openly and fairly, even when it's difficult, and especially when it's difficult. So after all this, if we think of those original 3 boos again, who would you pick? No, it's not number 1. I don't care how cute the dog is. In summary, a good studio culture is like a good relationship. It'll support you and help you grow. It demands nurturing and is always developing. Some boos can't be helped, and we need to know when to move on by recognizing these red flags. It's probably never going to be perfect, and the more we impact it individually, the more we impact studio culture worldwide. So on the note of recognizing contributions, you can find the names and Twitters of the artists and links I used above, and I'll post this on my Twitter after the talk. I'm sure you're all already familiar with these resources. I highly recommend them. If you're interested in learning more about what I've talked about today, anything under production, management, psychology related is always amazing. There's so much free content online available for you to learn more, and those are a really easy start, easy to digest. I also recommend deep diving into the above websites. Even if it's years old, if you find one thing that's valuable from it, you're a step ahead of where you were. Another great resource, people forget each other. Look around you. There's so many great people in this room, so get in touch with someone who's been doing this for longer, because they're going to want to help you avoid the mistakes that they've made. I also recommend lightly dipping into the Reddit subreddits. However, they're often under-moderated and the information isn't always correct. I personally manage the game production one and share any resources I think are valuable on there, and I will always do everything I can to keep that as safe a space as possible if you do like to discuss things using that platform. So I think I have like 2 minutes, but otherwise, worst case scenario, you can always DM me, just not about the shapes thing, because I know it's going to happen, and I'm ready for it, and I will fight you. Or you can get in touch with me via email as well. I also just want to thank all of you and the organisers of this amazing conference. I was so excited to come here and to get to chat about this stuff with you guys, and all the speakers today have been phenomenal. And also thank my studio for helping send me over here and supporting this sort of stuff. Yeah, does anyone have any questiones?
How do you actually properly go about disclosing that you have a chronic illness? Because I find it really hard because I have endometriosis and I'm like, how do I bring that up?
Yes, it is a really difficult thing. And I actually did this talk for my parents the other day. And my mum's like, are you sure you want to tell everyone? Like, do you want them all to know? And I'm like, yes, because the reality is it's not something I often disclose in interviews, because I find that if you do that, whether people want to or not, the little buzzer will go off for them. But I usually wait until I'm comfortable in the role, and then I sit down with whoever I need to and explain it. I think there are so many people who are coping with what you're coping with, what I'm coping with, what everyone else in the room is coping with. And if we think about that 1 in 5, the more we normalise these discussions and stop shying away from them and face them head on, the better we can plan for them and make better games with less pain for people. Yeah. Go for it. I think it's a combination. Anytime you bring someone into your space and into your studio, whether that's in your life or actually at work, they're not only going to impact the work, but they're going to impact all those other things we talked about. So I think there's always going to be a part that will happen organically, purely because of personality that people have. But there is a lot to be said for setting really clear boundaries and expectations and making sure people know what is and isn't okay. I think personality quirks are fine, that's going to happen, but I think there has to be some non-negotiables if you want to have a really positive culture for everyone, not just 1 or 2 people. Anyone else?
So I'm part of a very new studio that we're just sort of setting up. So we don't have any established culture in place as yet. So it's something that I'd like to get up and running. Have you got any tips to get sort of the whole team on board to work on it together, as opposed to me coming up with it and imposing it on everybody else?
Yeah, I think it does benefit from that structure. So I would start with, because you're going to have to go to whoever is organising it. If it is yourself that kind of is making those decisions about annual leave and those things, then you're fine. But if you're in that between an executive team, you need to have those answers first so that you can make sure that you don't overpromise to your team things you can't deliver on, because that immediately is going to negate some of that trust you have with them. I think it is very important to have a little bit of structure and then come together and go through it bit by bit, and also recognising along the way that every single person you have in that space is going to need something different from you, and making it clear that you can shift the support to suit those scenarios. Cool. Anyone else? Otherwise, I think we're good, because I think I'm out of time anyway. Yay. Awesome. Thanks, guys.